Join me tonight on Twitch at 11:30 p.m. Eastern at the conclusion of Sunday Night Football, where we'll talk about everything that happened in Week 10 of the NFL season. Plus, I'll have my thoughts on the Jaguars after this game against the Chiefs. Link to join below. And over on Jaguar Gatorade, a new college football video is out. In this video, we talk about a bizarre controversy involving West Virginia in the 1980s. Click the card in the upper right corner to watch. And now, on with our feature presentation. October 22nd, 1995. It's Week 8 of the NFL season, and as we near the halfway point in the year, we have a big AFC game on our hands over at the Oakland Coliseum between the Oakland Raiders and the Indianapolis Colts. The importance of this game cannot be overstated, as both the Colts and the Raiders have a ton to play for with regards to the playoff picture. The Raiders were 5-2, and sat one game back of the Kansas City Chiefs for the divisional lead in the AFC West entering Sunday, while the Colts were 4-2, and sat one game back of the Buffalo Bills for the divisional lead in the AFC East entering the day. In other words, the winner of this game puts themselves in a great position at the halfway point to win their division and host a playoff game, while the loser has a bit of an uphill climb if they want to win it, and while they still got a great chance of making the playoffs, obviously, they find themselves in a real dogfight for a spot. There was a lot riding on this game, to the point where this felt like one of the biggest games of the entire week on the NFL calendar, if not the biggest game. And as you can tell by the highlights, what we got was a fantastic victory for the Raiders in front of their home fans. Because in front of a crowd of over 53,000 strong, the Raiders wound up defeating the Colts by a final score of 30-17. Everything about this game for the Raiders seemed to go their way on both sides of the ball. Offensively, Vince Evans, the 40-year-old quarterback who got the start in favor of Jeff Hostetler, who was sidelined with a throat injury, somehow had arguably the best game of his career, and proved that 40 is the new 30, as he stunned just about everyone by going 23 for 35, completing 66% of his passes for 335 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a passer rating of 103.9. The defense played exceptionally well too. The Oakland defensive line forced Jim Harbaugh to go down to the ground 4 times on sacks. The incredible running back and reigning AP Offensive Rookie of the Year, Marshall Faulk, averaged less than 3 yards per carry. The defense forced 2 turnovers and forced the Colts to put the ball on the ground 3 times. And the defense held the Colts to just 3 for 13 on 3rd and 4th down combined. When your opponent is converting just 23% of the time in these situations, you're going to be in a pretty good spot to win the game. So you would think that just about everyone in the stadium that day, that all 53,000 or so fans would feel like they got their money's worth. They got their team back after nearly a decade and a half in Los Angeles. They got great weather at 63 degrees and sunny. And they got to see their team win in what was shaping up to be a fantastic season. Surely, everything went swimmingly on this day, right? Well, not quite. Because thanks to an absolutely insane lack of planning on the part of Oakland Coliseum officials, one of the features that was commonplace at games was non-existent. It's amazing how no one thought this through whatsoever, and how all common sense seemed to be thrown out the window. But during this 1995 game between the Colts and the Raiders, that's exactly what happened. And this is the story behind what has to be, quite possibly, the dumbest moment and the dumbest controversy in the already controversial history of the Oakland Coliseum. Before I talk about the actual incident in question, we need some context to understand just exactly how the Oakland Coliseum was configured, because that will help us to understand the problem that had an absolutely terrible solution. In 1995, the Raiders announced that after playing in Los Angeles since 1982, that they were moving back to Oakland for the 1995 season, playing there for the first time since 1981. I'm not going to dive into why that was the case, because the entire move was an incredibly complicated and near decade-long procedure. But to make a long story short, the Raiders were now playing again in the Oakland Coliseum, which had been their home from 1966 to 1981. But what made this move in particular interesting was that it was announced super late in the offseason. Whereas most relocations are announced early in the offseason, before the NFL draft, and usually no later than March, this one wasn't announced until June 25th, and there were people contesting the move and the legality of it as late as July. Because of this, Oakland Coliseum officials didn't exactly have the Raiders as their #1 priority for the season, although they announced that renovations would be coming in 1996 to make the stadium more suitable for football. And this meant that in 1995, for the first month of the season, the Raiders, when it came to the seating configuration of the stadium, were at the complete mercy of the Oakland Athletics. What did this mean from a seating perspective? Well, notice how for these first 2 home games that the Raiders had against the San Diego Chargers and the Philadelphia Eagles, that the seats along the sideline seemed really far away from the field. That's because the field was configured in a way where one of the end zones was in the outfield. It wasn't an ideal configuration by any means. You couldn't move the seats in closer, and you couldn't just block those seats off and put temporary bleachers up in front of them, since not only would that be way too time consuming, and you might not have enough time to go back and forth between football and baseball quickly, but it could mess up the grass pretty badly, and the baseball team kinda needs that. Because of this, for the first 2 games of the season, the only way to sit along the sideline of the visiting team was to sit pretty far away from it. However, the good news for the Raiders was that in 1995, the Oakland Athletics absolutely stunk. On July 4th, the A's were in a pretty good spot, sitting at 35-30, right in the thick of things for the AL West and for a possible wild card. And then, the bottom fell out from under them, as they ended the season with an abysmal 67-77 record, meaning that they went just 32-47 over the final 79 games of the season, winning just 40% of the time. And even better for the Raiders was that the Athletics ended the season on a 9-game road stretch, as their final home game was against the California Angels on September 20th. For what it's worth, the A's won that game to improve to 67-68, and then collapsed even more than they already had to lose their final 9 games. This was the last time an Oakland-based pro sports team collapsed in 1995. Anyways, for the purposes of our story, what this meant was that the Raiders could use the stadium however they saw fit for the rest of the year. No longer did they have to have seats in the outfield far away from the field. They could bring seats closer through temporary bleachers, which had been sitting in a parking lot by an overpass for 13 years, and could increase capacity that way. Because on October 8th, as the Seahawks came into town, and the Raiders won by a final score of 34-14, the field shifted 90 degrees to improve the sightlines, and temporary bleachers were used. You don't see a stadium field and its placement literally changing in the middle of the season, with very few exceptions. The Baltimore Colts did this in a 1970 game against the Kansas City Chiefs on Monday Night Football, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But that's what the Raiders did here. That was the good news with the temporary bleachers. Everything was structurally sound, the seats were closer, and the field felt way more like a football field versus a baseball field where everything was so far away, especially since this was the original Coliseum configuration when the Raiders initially played there. And this was a long overdue move. As former Raiders player John Vella said on how important it was to go to this alignment with the temporary bleachers, there's a big difference. Fans are a lot closer to you, and it's a lot cozier. The people are right on top of you. It is very similar to the dog pound in Cleveland. The distraction and noise and everything is something I remember more than any other stadium I played in. However, the bad news was that if you were sitting in the bleachers, you couldn't hear a thing. And I don't mean that you couldn't hear a thing because the fans were too loud. I mean that because of the way the sound system was designed, you couldn't hear anything. This was a section of the stadium that was grass, so you didn't have speakers right on top of it like you did in areas of the stadium where fans are sitting. And this meant that for fans during this game against the Seahawks, they heard nothing, or what they did hear was barely audible, since there were no speakers. Any announcements in the stadium? Any calls made by the officials? You couldn't really hear a peep. Alright, so for all intents and purposes, it's a new stadium configuration. There's gonna be some kinks to work out, and the Raiders heard these complaints loud and clear. So their goal for the game against the Colts was simple. Find a way to get sound to the temporary bleachers. And that's when the officials decided on the solution to bring cranes into the venue, put them behind the temporary bleachers, hang a speaker box from the crane and pump in the audio that way. You can see that in this screenshot right here, which came from Week 12 when the Cowboys played the Raiders at the Coliseum. In many ways, this solution was kinda genius. You didn't need to build anything permanent. It was a nice, temporary fix to a temporary problem, and it was relatively low cost compared to the alternatives. I should note, however, that this screenshot from the Cowboys game is not the same as how these speakers were aligned during the Colts game. Because during the Colts game, well, let's just say that no stadium officials stopped to think about how these speakers would look. Because now, instead of depriving some fans of their sense of sound, we're going to deprive all fans of their sense of sight. This is what the stadium and the crane situation looked like during the Colts game. Unfortunately, based on the camera angles that NBC showed throughout this game, this is the best look that we're going to get. However, you might be able to tell a very obvious problem with the positioning of the speaker. Look at where the speaker is, and look at what it is right in front of. That's right. The speaker was literally right in front of the Diamond Vision video board. As in, the video board that could display messages, the video board that displays digital advertisements, and most importantly for the purposes of this, the video board that shows any videos during the game, including instant replays and live footage. And I guess even to some extent, let's look at this aerial shot and say that something was happening in the far corner of the end zone by left field. If you're in the upper deck in the opposite end zone, guess what? You might not even be able to see that clearly, as your view was partially blocked by, you guessed it, those giant speakers hanging from cranes. In other words, not only could no fan watch replays or watch videos, but some fans couldn't even see the entire field. And the crazy part about all of this was that there was quite the easy fix to the problem. You could have just, move the crane over by 5 feet. Seriously, just move the crane to anywhere that isn't directly in front of the video board. This is the equivalent of when you're at a friend's house and you're watching a video or stream or game on their computer with them, and they refuse to move the cursor from the center of the screen, so the heart of the picture is blocked by the cursor, when all you have to do is move it a bit to get it out of the way. If you move the crane over maybe 2 feet to the right, you avoid this issue. Did no one, for 1 second, sit literally anywhere in the Coliseum as this was happening, and realize, hey, wait a second, this could be a problem, I can't see? Did no one, upon realizing that they had to tilt their head to look around the speaker box and view the full picture of the video board, think, something's not right? The Oakland Coliseum officials, on this day getting ready for the game, were either so lazy or so incompetent that they're the kind of people who hang a picture frame up in their house willy-nilly and never stop to think of it straight, even though the frame is clearly tilted by 30 degrees. And I know that in the grand scheme of things, having an obstructed video board or partially obstructed seats for a very specific part of the field isn't a huge deal, and that when I first said that a speaker box was being hung up by a crane, they maybe expected something way worse to happen. But come on, this was such an avoidable problem, and was insanely careless on the part of stadium officials. So what's the moral of the story? Whether you're at home, or whether you're in a stadium where over 50,000 people are going to be, if you've got a television and you've got something hanging, make sure that the hanging item doesn't obstruct the view of the TV. Heck, when I throw parties and decorate and hang stuff from the ceiling, I make sure that I check literally every nook and cranny and every spot to make sure that people can see the TV perfectly no matter where they are and don't have to get in awkward positions. If I can do that, there's no reason that one of the however many stadium officials that were there couldn't do that. At least for their next game against the Cowboys, they moved the speakers and the crane over a bit to avoid this problem, so it wasn't directly in front of the video board. But this is a problem that never should have happened in the first place. Because if a picture was worth 1,000 words, then on this day in 1995, because of the placement of the cranes in the speaker box, the books of Raider fans were completely blank and empty. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.